Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. We've reached a milestone, 1,000 shows. Please join the party while we celebrate. Find out how the program got started. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Today, you'll find out about the origins of the People's Pharmacy. How did the show get its start?
We've always been interested in home remedies, but where do they come from? We learn about many of them from you, our listeners. What are some of our favorites?
Are you fed up with flip-flops on food? Eggs and shrimp used to be forbidden, but now they're fine.
First, butter was bad, but now it's better than margarine.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, we invite you to celebrate show number 1000 with us.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, don't feel guilty about enjoying a couple of cups of coffee each day. A Greek study has just confirmed what previous research suggested. Coffee drinkers are at reduced risk for type 2 diabetes. The study followed more than 1,300 Greek adults for 10 years. Approximately 800 of them were considered casual coffee drinkers, downing less than a cup and a half daily. More than 200 did not drink coffee at all, and almost 400 normally drank more than 1.5 cups a day. These regular coffee drinkers were 54% less likely to be diagnosed with diabetes during the study. They also had lower blood levels of inflammatory markers. Scientists don't suggest people rely on coffee alone to protect them from diabetes, but in combination with maintaining a healthy weight and exercising regularly, sipping a couple of cups of coffee every day might help.
New research in rats suggests that marijuana contains a compound that can help broken bones heal faster. Israeli scientists extracted cannabidiol, which does not alter perception. They administered it to rats with broken leg bones and found that the rats given cannabidiol healed more quickly. Their bones laid down a stronger mineral matrix. The rats given a different compound of marijuana, tetrahydrocannabinol or THC, did not heal more quickly. It's the THC compound in marijuana that makes people high. This study suggests that it's unlikely that smoking marijuana would have beneficial effects on bones. Nevertheless, cannabidiol might help broken bones heal faster and stronger.
You may have noticed defibrillator stations in airports, sports arenas, and other public places, and wondered if bystanders can really make a difference when someone has a heart attack. New research shows that the answer is definitively yes. Investigators in Japan tracked heart attacks and survival. They evaluated chest compression or defibrillation employed by non-professionals. Roughly 168,000 people suffered out-of-hospital cardiac arrest between January 2005 and December 2012. Almost 47,000 of them had defibrillation before arriving at the hospital, and nearly 79,000 were given chest compression by a bystander. The results were encouraging. More than 8% of those who got chest compression survived without brain damage, compared to only 4% of those without the intervention. People lucky enough to have someone use a public access automated external defibrillator right on the spot were especially fortunate. 40% of them survived well. This suggests that ordinary citizens who know what to do in this type of crisis can make a real difference in heart attack survival.
New research shows an old-fashioned and inexpensive approach can help patients control symptoms of moderate to severe asthma. The trial included 43 adults with asthma whose symptoms were being kept under control with medications. All the volunteers got yoga breathing classes twice weekly for 3 months. In addition, half were assigned to walk or run on a treadmill twice a week for 35 minutes at a time. The investigators report that lung sensitivity to asthma triggers diminished among the exercisers, but not the other participants. Exercisers also had lower levels of inflammatory compounds called cytokines, thought to contribute to airway spasms. Experts not involved in the study cautioned that people with asthma should check with their doctors before starting aerobic exercise. While the exercise may be helpful, people may need to use special precautions, such as an inhaler before beginning, to make sure that exertion does not trigger an attack.
Most of us aren't eating enough fruits and vegetables, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The recommended intake is 1.5 to 2 cups of fruit and 2 to 3 cups of vegetables daily for relatively sedentary people. The experts are especially interested in having people consume dark green and orange veggies, but only about 13% of American adults get the recommended amount. Fresh produce consumption was lowest in southern states such as Mississippi and Tennessee, and highest in California, but still nothing to brag about. These results indicate there's plenty of room for improvement in the average American diet. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. This is the People's Pharmacy. Thank you for joining us. To celebrate our 1000th episode, we invited sustainers of our host station, North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, to come to a live show at the William and Ida Friday Center in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Now we invite you to settle back and enjoy the show.
Welcome to this live edition of the People's Pharmacy. It's show 1000. I'm Joe Graydon. I'm a pharmacologist.
I'm Terry Graydon. I'm a medical anthropologist.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by the listeners and sustainers of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
We could not have reached this milestone without WUNC's support all the way.
You know, the People's Pharmacy is a community. We get our home remedies from you, our listeners. And we've had the great fortune of being able to interview some of the most interesting people in healthcare today.
And now I would like to introduce Frank Stasio. He's host of The State of Things. Frank has vast experience throughout public radio, including NPR. So we are extremely fortunate that he's here, sharing his wit, wisdom, and talent with us at North Carolina Public Radio.
Thank you. It is a real honor to be here. I have to say, I met Joe and Terry first as a fan up in Washington, listening to you on WPFW, and was a huge fan of Joe and Terry. And as I considered the possibility of leaving my work with NPR and coming down here, one of the things I thought about was, you mean I can work with Joe and Terry Graydon? Seriously? At that radio station? So that's a big part of it, and I've been working with them now for 10 years. It's been a real honor to kind of share studio space with them and find out what they're up to. Joe's been doing commentaries for NPR. I think, well, while I was working there and before, they have written 19 books, authored hundreds of newspaper columns, and today we're celebrating their 1000th radio show. Amazing. Amazing. So thank you for letting me share the stage. Well, let's get right back to the beginning. How did this show get started?
It's your story, Joe. Take it away.
Well, it was pretty much of an accident. Gary Shivers was one of the key elements of the station back in the old days. And I went to Gary and said, could we do a talk radio show? And he said, sure, give it a go. I don't think he imagined, and we certainly didn't imagine 35 years later we'd still be doing it and still be having so much fun.
So you talked about talking to the station manager, hey, can we do a talk show? But it wasn't just a talk show. You had already had an interest in medicine and health and pharmacology, right? So take us back. And how did it become the show that it is?
We initially, started with books, then a newspaper column, And then it was like, well, I love radio. I love talk radio. It's the most fun that I had on book tours, which I did for years. Maybe I could do that. Boy, was I bad. I mean, it's so different being the guest versus being the host, and I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, talk about those commentaries, because you were on NPR doing commentaries, and that's when you were, as you say, were the guest.
Right.
And that's one thing to be the expert, but then they have to be...
And when you have to be able to actually let the guest be the star, and let the guest be able to reveal the information that they have to share with the audience, that's the secret. That's the special magic sauce that you do so well.
So how did you two meet?
We met at a swimming pool in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Joe's girlfriend borrowed my bathing cap.
Thank goodness. And now we are celebrating in just a few weeks our 45th wedding anniversary.
You were interested in pharmacology. That's why you two were together in Ann Arbor, right?
Well, actually, I was doing anthropology. He was doing pharmacology grad school, and I was getting ready to start anthropology grad school. Yeah.
And that took you both to Mexico, your work as an anthropologist.
I dragged him off to Mexico so I could do my medical anthropology research for my dissertation, which I did do.
So, Terry, you've got work to do. Joe, you're hanging out for the ride and got plenty of time to lay in the hammock and think and think and think. And that's when you start thinking about these columns, right?
Yeah, in case people haven't noticed, I'm a bit of a type A personality. And so the hammock was great. I liked it for a few minutes, but then it was like, I gotta do something. And the do something was, maybe there's a book here. Before we left for Mexico, there was a going away party, and my Aunt Evelyn came over to me and said, "Shh, Joe, don't tell anybody, but I'm taking this little white pill. Can I have a glass of white wine with it?" And I said, "Well, Aunt Evelyn, what are you taking?" "I don't know." I thought, oh my goodness. If my Aunt Evelyn doesn't know what she's taking and she's worried about interaction, maybe there's some interest out there. And I don't think anybody ever really appreciated, myself included, how much interest there was in things like drug interactions.
So you've got the hammock, you're in Oaxaca. Why leave? Why leave? Well, because you can get a job at the nursing program at Duke University, Terry, right?
Exactly right. Quite honestly, while I was writing my dissertation, Joe was writing his first book, The People's Pharmacy. He had started it in Mexico. He finished it while I was working on my dissertation. And even before I finished my dissertation, we moved here to Durham so that I could teach at the School of Nursing at Duke. And it was a wonderful time. I learned so much from my colleagues.
So that gets you to North Carolina. You're still interested in medicine. By now, had you written your second book by now?
No, that was when The People's Pharmacy came out initially in 1976, just after we arrived, and that led to the famous interview at National Public Radio right around Thanksgiving. The person asked me, "Well, what do I do after I have just eaten too much?" And I gave them some silly answer, and they said, "Oh, that's pretty interesting. Would you like to do commentaries?" So David Malpass and Jackie Judd, who were the two people who were involved, said, "Okay, let's do it." And I did commentaries for the next few years.
That's how they produced all the radio up there for several years. Like, oh, that's a good idea. What, you want to be on the radio? And you were. So you did the show now, and it's certainly changed. Talk about the evolution of the show since the beginning.
It's changed dramatically, in large measure thanks to Terry, because I came at this from a very kind of straight arrow approach. I'm a pharmacologist, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials. Don't tell me about herbs and nuts and all that weird stuff. I mean, I don't believe that. And then Terry said, but people's experience, that's worth something. And I believed her.
Well, you do have to pay attention to what people are doing, and you do have to pay attention to people's experience. And so that's part of how we shifted focus in terms of the subject matter.
Do you see yourselves as an alternative medicine show? You talk about mainstream medicine, but it does feel for some to be the kind of outsider's look at medicine, which would include herbal and what we call alternative remedies?
I think we have a foot in both worlds. So we like to deal with the science when there is science behind alternative approaches, which is why Dr. Taroni Lodog is such a favorite guest of ours.
But we don't think that people should turn their backs on conventional medicine when it can be helpful. And I think that we really strive to give people the information that they need to be able to decide when this approach will be helpful and when that approach will be better.
So what are some of the challenges that you faced along the way as the show has built and grown the way it has so successfully?
It's all fun. I mean, let's just start with that. This is really, what we do is just fun. So the challenges are just to make it the best possible radio that will interest our listeners. If we're passionate about it, if we care about the subject, if we can relate to the guests, the same things that you care about, then it's going to be good radio.
You do listen and take a lot of calls, and a lot of them are home remedies. Do you try all these remedies at home?
Luckily, we don't have that many ailments, so we can't try them all.
You would if you tried every remedy.
Well, I remember one remedy. We had been told about this particular approach to burns, and it was just before Thanksgiving. And so I'm taking the turkey out of the oven, and, like most people, I had a little accident, and whoa, that really hurts. So while Terry's carving up the turkey, I've got my finger under cold water, and it still really hurts. And Terry's got the turkey, and it's on the table, and it really hurts. And she said, "Why don't you try that remedy?" And I did. And it worked. Wow. And it was like, that's so cool.
Wait, what was it?
Soy sauce.
Soy sauce, really?
You're listening to Frank Stay Show, a longtime NPR correspondent. He's host of The State of Things, a daily news magazine program from North Carolina Public Radio.
For our 1000th episode, we were delighted to have B.J. Leiderman come down from Asheville, North Carolina to perform our theme music live. BJ composed our theme and the themes for many well-known NPR shows, including Morning Edition, Weekend Edition, Marketplace, and the Stump the Chumps music for Car Talk. Watch for his debut album later this year, Natural Public Leiderman.
We had a lot of help putting this live show together, so we'd like to thank the folks at the William and Ida Friday Center, R.J. Ellis, Josh Benjamin, and Elena Outlaw.
We'd like to acknowledge the great support we get from our host station, WUNC. Thanks to President and General Manager Connie Walker and the Program Director David Brower, as well as Ann Kendrick, Regina Yeager, and Jennifer Fusco.
Thanks to our engineer Al Wodarski, our sound editor Dave Graydon, and to producer Lynn Siegel, and technical assistant Sophie Copeland.
At this point, we need to take a short break. Listen closely to our music today. It's part of the live performance by B.J. Leiderman.
We'll be right back to talk about wacky home remedies, like putting soap under the sheet.
We'll tell you about our meeting with Dr. Ruth.
We answer questions from the audience about leg cramps, vinegar, and other remedies for heartburn, and the benefits and challenges of following a low-carb diet.
We'll also discuss flip-flops and why you should listen to your grandmother. If you value the health information you get when you listen to the People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com. Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. The number is 800-345-7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show number 1000. Or visit our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're celebrating our 1000th show. We'd like to start by thanking our listeners on public radio stations around the country. Some of you have been paying attention to the numbers as they've been adding up and asked us what we would do for show number 1000. So we decided to celebrate.
For the celebration, our host station, North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, invited hundreds of faithful supporters to a live show at the William and Ida Friday Center for Continuing Education in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
We were fortunate to have B.J. Leiderman come and perform the theme music he wrote for us. He also composed the themes of many other public radio programs, including Morning Edition, Weekend Edition, Marketplace, Science Friday, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and Car Talk. His upcoming debut album is called Natural Public Leiderman. Listen for it later this year.
Frank Stasio agreed to join us on stage to help you understand the history of the People's Pharmacy and how we made it to 1,000 shows. Frank is a longtime NPR correspondent and personality who joined North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, almost a decade ago. He's host of its very popular midday news magazine show, The State of Things. Here's Frank with a question about weird home remedies.
So what's the wackiest thing that you ever heard that actually worked? Like that you were totally skeptical about and then you looked and said, this'll work.
I think the wackiest thing that we hear about over and over again, and you will not be surprised to hear this is the wackiest thing, is putting soap under the bottom sheet to ward off leg cramps. Yeah. And I am convinced that it works because I do it myself. It works for me.
Well, Terry, is black belt karate, and, she comes home from some pretty intense workouts, and the soap works. And when the soap disappears, ouch, the cramps come back. So we think it works. We've even had some people who have tried to explain the mechanism.
But you also had some great testimony, including at least one woman who kind of snuck it under her husband was a total skeptic, so she surprised him one night.
Yes, well, her husband is a physician, and so she used cover of darkness to put the soap in under the bottom sheet, and she said, well, for 3 nights he had no leg cramps whatsoever and no idea why.
So you talk about black belt and karate, Joe, and I'm just wondering about the effect of this show on your personal relationship as a husband and wife.
We are so blessed. I mean, we do everything together. We write books together. We write our newspaper column. We sit at the same computer terminal. We do the radio show together. I mean, we are together 24 hours a day. And
except for karate class.
Except for karate. That's not my thing. Or when I play tennis. So it's pretty amazing.
So it is amazing. I mean, you do talk about everything from toe fungus to sex, and often in the same program. So how do you keep it from getting awkward?
Do we?
No, you don't, actually, and that's what we love about the show. No, it is great that you do these forays and actually talk about this stuff as though it's a topic that adults should be listening to and talking about. And so it's not awkward, I think, for that reason.
It took us a while, I think, it certainly took me a while to be comfortable talking about sex on the radio. And it's not something we talk about all the time, but being able to say, okay, this is a part of life. This is something that we don't need to whisper and titter and joke about. It really is something we need to discuss seriously.
Well, I remember Dr. Ruth was in town. Now, she wouldn't come to the studio. She definitely said, no, I'm not going to take time for that.
Too busy.
Yeah, way too busy. But I am doing a book signing out at the Barnes & Noble at South Point. And if you wanted to show up, maybe I'll talk to you.
So we showed up.
We showed up with our microphone, and, you stick a microphone in front of Dr. Ruth and just stand back.
It's great.
And, of course, she was talking about some pretty sensitive topics, and there were lots of women standing around going, yeah, right on. And so, we put it on the air, and it was fun because it's Dr. Ruth, and she can get away with it.
Is that a microphone in your hand, or are you just happy to see me? Your last, wish I could do the accent. Your last book explored medical mistakes, and that was a heroic book, and the top 10 medical mistakes that doctors make. And the book came out a couple of years ago. Has there been any improvement since?
I think there is some improvement. Terry and I have been founders of an organization called the Society for Participatory Medicine that brings doctors and patients together on an equal footing. We've also been involved in an organization trying to reduce misdiagnoses. I think there is an awareness, and I think there's a real attempt to make things better, but we have a long way to go.
Yeah, that's really the answer is people still need to be very vigilant. There still are a lot of mistakes happening. We're seeing a little bit of progress, a little more transparency where hospitals and healthcare providers are a little more open about what they can and can't do and what they have and haven't done. But there's a long, long way to go yet.
In the days since your Aunt Evelyn talked to you about the white pill and the white wine, and that actually harks back to a time when all of us were thoroughly deferential to the medical community. Things have changed. Do you think they've radically changed now? Are we generally more asking more questions and approaching this as the consumer with our right to know?
Absolutely. The Internet has changed everything. Despite some of the pitfalls and the problems, it has democratized access to information. And so I think most people now are doing a lot of searching, and I think they are becoming much better informed.
Every so often, one of our expert guests will suggest that people should look up their drugs on the Internet and read the information, and we always endorse that. In fact, we tell people that ourselves. The information can be a little bit difficult to understand. You may need to look up a couple terms in a medical dictionary, but it's absolutely worth doing.
Well, we're celebrating your 1000th show, and that is just amazing. So let's stop here and congratulate you just for that. I should tell you, it's actually kind of more than 1,000, but they really didn't start counting from day one. And so, but at WUNC, we pride ourselves on being accurate. You got to celebrate at some point. 1,000 shows. So give us a preview. What's in store for the next 1,000? What's happening?
More, better, and lots of fun.
Thank you so much, Joe and Terry. Congratulations.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. We're delighted you're here for this live production of episode 1000 of the People's Pharmacy.
The People's Pharmacy is brought to you by the listeners and sustainers of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
We've been collecting home remedies for 40 years. Our mantra, if it might help, and it won't hurt, and it doesn't cost very much, we'd love to talk about it, and we welcome your questions right now. Feel free to go to the microphones if you've got a home remedy to share, an experience that you've had, if you've benefited from something you've heard on the People's Pharmacy. We'd love to hear about your experience. Now, some of the home remedies that we really love best come from listeners of the People's Pharmacy.
Well, there was Betsy White in Morehead City, North Carolina. Betsy had rheumatoid arthritis, She was not really able to get around. The arthritis was so bad that it was impairing her mobility. She read about gin-soaked raisins and decided to try them. She started them probably around Thanksgiving, and she sent us a lovely note in the shape of a heart that we received in February. And she said, "These gin raisins, they are allowing me to get up and walk around." Her doctor told her, "Whatever it is you're doing, Betsy, keep on doing it."
She was able to cut back on her dose of prednisone. She was able to cut back on her dose of Imuran, a very powerful drug, with her doctor's supervision and permission, and eventually she was able to walk. She came to Durham and visited us a few years later, and I was keeping my fingers crossed. Will the raisins still be working? And she said, "Yes, absolutely. I have my dose of gin-soaked raisins every day." In fact, it was 9 every day. So for Betsy, that remedy really worked. Let's take our first question, and please identify yourself by your first name.
Hello, my name is Jean, and I have to comment on the soap for cramps remedy. So occasionally I suffer leg cramps at night, and usually putting soap onto the cramp directly makes it go away instantly. One evening I was on a business trip and I experienced severe cramping, and the soap was not doing a thing. And I couldn't sleep, and I went online and I discovered electrolyte deficiency is another primary cause of these cramps. So I went downstairs and I got some Gatorade, and that addressed the problem right away.
Gee, thank you so much.
Yeah.
We hear periodically that people get benefit by taking, for example, magnesium before they go to bed, and that seems to help, many people. And then, Terry, there is the famous pickle juice remedy.
There is. Some people will fight off muscle cramps by using pickle juice. And I think football coaches and basketball coaches actually also use this pickle juice remedy when their players get muscle cramps. Now, it turns out that there is actually science to support pickle juice for leg cramps. The research was done at Brigham Young University, 5 or 6 years ago. They recruited about 10 young men, college students, athletes, and they had them ride a stationary bicycle until they were completely exhausted. And then they put a little electrode on their big toes to stimulate a muscle cramp. They didn't want to stimulate one of the big muscles to cramp up. They only wanted these guys to hurt a little bit. And they gave them either water or pickle juice. And it turned out the water did absolutely nothing, but the pickle juice made the cramp go away 40% faster.
We love when science supports home remedies. Our favorite Plan B remedy for leg cramps is yellow mustard. And I don't know where we first heard about it, but you've tried this when you get a cramp after a really intense workout.
Many, many listeners have called to share this remedy with us, Joe, and you don't smear the mustard on the cramp. What you do is swallow a teaspoonful of yellow mustard. It is amazing how quickly it can alleviate that muscle cramp. Should we take another question?
Next question, please.
I'm Barbara from Chapel Hill, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm a nurse practitioner, and of course I've relied on the People's Pharmacy for a lot of treatments. But one that I found helpful was instead of taking PPIs, which were leaching my bones, I started the organic apple cider vinegar. And within 2 to 3 weeks, I was no longer having to suffer symptoms, and I was using ginger to top it off in between. Now I don't even remember, unless I eat a lot of pizza or tomato-based things, to take the vinegar. But it has been so helpful to me. Before, if I missed the pill by 6 hours, my throat would close up and I couldn't swallow.
Barbara, thank you so much for sharing that. And we should explain that PPIs are the very popular heartburn medications like Nexium, Prilosec, Prevacid.
It seems so counterintuitive, this idea of actually taking vinegar, apple cider vinegar, to soothe heartburn. I mean, that is like the most illogical approach you can ever imagine. And yet we have heard from so many people who say, yeah, vinegar actually worked. And I didn't need those powerful acid-suppressing drugs. Now, something else that people sometimes use that seems rather surprising to me, but many people claim that it works, almonds.
That's right. We've heard from a lot of people who say that just a few almonds, or maybe as many as a small handful after a meal, will completely prevent heartburn following a meal. So that is certainly a safe remedy, certainly inexpensive, and absolutely worth a try.
Another one that's a little bizarre. Someone was at a basketball game, if I'm not mistaken, at a big stadium, and began feeling the sense of reflux and heartburn after all the hot dogs and the sauerkraut and the beer, and then remembered the yellow mustard approach. Again, counterintuitive. Yellow mustard for heartburn, really? But he said it really soothed the discomfort. So, if it worked, that's great.
Do we have another remedy?
This is not a remedy. Sorry. We'll switch the subject a little bit.
Okay.
But I've become a big believer in low-carb lifestyle after I started a low-carb diet a few years back and lost over 40 pounds. The problem that I have, though, is that finding no sugar-added items in the grocery store or whatever, like no sugar-added ketchup, no sugar-added peanut butter, all these kinds of things are very, very difficult to find. And I'm very surprised, particularly with the level of diabetes in the country. What's your advice for people that are trying to find items like this that are no sugar added and so forth?
You have identified a great challenge. I think that, one of the important discoveries of the last 10 or 15 years is that sugar is not our friend, and that a low carbohydrate lifestyle is a healthier lifestyle, especially when those carbs are simple and refined. So I think the challenge is to read the labels, to try and cut back on the sugar, just as we've been told to cut back on the sodium. But I think that there is greater and greater interest in finding foods with less sugar and less carbohydrate. You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
Thanks for listening to this podcast of The People's Pharmacy. If you like it, why not rate or review it in the iTunes store? We'd appreciate it.
Welcome back to this live edition of The People's Pharmacy. It's show 1000. The People's Pharmacy is made possible by listeners and sustainers of North Carolina Public Radio. Next question or story, please.
Well, I think we should talk about the soy sauce that you were describing to Frank.
Well, the soy sauce remedy is just so astonishing because we heard about it on the radio many years ago. A gentleman from actually Lenore, North Carolina at the time he spoke to us, but the event had happened in Fort Bragg. Right. So tell us a little bit about the Fort Bragg Ranger. He was in a training exercise, and a smoke grenade, I guess it's called, went off unexpectedly in his hand. It was not supposed to have done that.
and it burned his hand and his arm. It was a bad burn. Well, the Special Forces medic came over to take care of this burn and did so, sprayed some stuff on him and wrapped it up. And he was expecting that he would lose the entire training day. But he said, well, I was surprised. The arm felt much better. I was able to finish my day of training. And a few days later in the mess hall, the medic came over to ask how I was doing. And I said, well, I'm doing fine. The skin's a little pink, but it's really not a bad burn. What was that? Stuff that you put on my arm. And the medic said, oh, that's soy sauce. We learned that in Vietnam. And so apparently, Special Forces, Rangers, they're all using soy sauce for battle burns.
And we welcome your questions, your comments, and your stories today. Do you get confused with those health headlines? Do you get a little angry when we do a U-turn? Cholesterol is really bad. No, cholesterol is maybe not so bad.
Or maybe, don't eat butter, eat margarine. Oh, no, don't eat margarine, eat butter.
Oh, trans fats, that's the problem. Salt, watch out. Oh, no, it's not that bad after all.
I'll bet you've got some favorite switches in confusing health headlines that you could share with us. But we're going to share with you our very favorite, our top confusing flip-flop is eggs. Who here remembers being told, don't eat eggs?
For purposes of identification, it's almost everybody in the audience. And I would like to point out that Terry's dad, who is a very healthy
91 years old,
exercises, has been doing very well for a very long time, just shunned eggs. It was like if you ate an egg, you were risking a heart attack.
I think he still feels like he's really skating on thin ice when he takes my mother out for breakfast and orders scrambled eggs.
And so I think literally millions of Americans for decades were incredibly cautious about eggs. They might have egg whites, an egg white omelet, but the idea of actually having a regular old-fashioned egg was a seemingly scary thing because the yolk was loaded with cholesterol.
Now, that's true. Egg yolks are loaded with cholesterol. And so it made logical sense that if you were worried about your blood cholesterol, that you would not consume something that had a lot of cholesterol in it. The only gap is nobody actually looked to do the research in those days. They hadn't done the research to see whether actually eating egg yolks that were high in cholesterol made your own blood cholesterol go up. When they finally did that research, Joe, what did they find?
No impact. And so literally for 30 or 40 years, Americans changed their dietary patterns and switched from eating eggs for breakfast to cereal. And a lot of that cereal was pretty simple, refined carbohydrate. In fact, if it didn't have sugar on it, people put sugar on it. And so they traded in a high-protein breakfast for a high-carbohydrate breakfast. And it didn't get us very far. In fact, if you look around, it would appear that it increased our obesity rate. Now, we can't blame it all on breakfast, but that was part of it. The thing that's sort of interesting is that the guidelines that have just come out from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Terry, said
it's all right to eat eggs.
In fact, they said it's all right to eat cholesterol, which is a complete U-turn from 10 years, 20, or 30 years ago. So how does that make you feel? Like, do you feel betrayed? Do you feel like, wow, how did that happen exactly? We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, your concerns, your stories about the flip-flops, the confusing headlines. We have 2 microphones that are waiting for you, so please just step right up to the microphone and share your questions, your concerns, and your stories with us today on the People's Pharmacy.
And we go to our first participant.
I'm Sue from Carborough. Could you give us the real skinny on gluten? Please.
Thank you, Sue.
The real skinny on gluten, it's complicated. You know, on the People's Pharmacy, we started talking about celiac disease, I'm going to guess 15 or 20 years ago, before it became the disease du jour. And one of the first guests, actually, they were a duo. I think he's from the UK, Peter Green at Columbia University, and Dr. Alessio Fasano, you know where he's from, Italy. And they pointed out that coming from Italy and England, they were very familiar with celiac disease, but American physicians seemingly weren't that knowledgeable.
In the interim, which I think it has been about 15 years, all of a sudden America has discovered gluten, and many people who don't have celiac disease are avoiding gluten. Gluten is the protein in wheat, barley, and rye. And for people who have celiac disease, it has to be avoided scrupulously, because otherwise people are setting themselves up for terrible, terrible trouble. For other people who are sensitive to gluten but do not have celiac disease, some of them also benefit from avoiding gluten. The rest of us don't really need to worry about gluten nearly as much as we sometimes do.
The only thing that's sort of interesting about the gluten-free diet is that almost by definition it reduces the amount of simple carbohydrates you consume. I ran into a gentleman the other day and he said, well, I've been told that I probably do have celiac disease and I'm supposed to stay away from gluten. What should I avoid? And I mentioned pizza, and he said, pizza? I love pizza. Give up pizza? I don't think so. I thought, okay, that's going to be an interesting challenge. So you can tell somebody, yes, you should stay away from wheat. And they go, oh, okay, but I can't give up pizza. So
or pretzels, or pasta, or bread, or lots of things.
But I think we have kind of gotten a little carried away with the gluten-free craze, and most people can consume gluten. But you can do your own experiment and see. And by the way, should you wish to be tested for celiac disease, is it simple as a blood test? Now, Terry, one of the great flip-flops of all time seems to be one of our favorite foods, chocolate.
Oh, yes. And aren't we lucky that the way that the flip-flop has fallen is the chocolate is now health food.
Yeah, I mean, we were told, oh, it's high in fat, it's bad for you, it'll keep you awake, it'll cause irregular heart rhythms, and your blood pressure will go up. Well, au contraire, it's good for the heart.
It is good for the heart, and in fact, there was a big study in Scotland not too long ago showing that people who eat chocolate actually have fewer heart attacks and a lower risk of death from heart disease than people who eschew it.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, chocolate lowers blood pressure.
Chocolate does lower blood pressure. Now, you do have to choose your chocolate carefully. You want to be choosing chocolate, if possible, that's high in cocoa flavanols, and that means a chocolate that doesn't have the chocolate part all crowded out by milk and sugar.
Next question or comment, please.
Hi, I'm Lynn from Chapel Hill, and I have a food flip-flop question about milk. For years we were told to avoid whole milk because of its unnecessary fats in favor of skim milk. But now there's a movement to embrace whole milk for its healthy, beneficial fats. Which is better?
What a great question. And I don't think the flip-flops have finished on this one yet. I think this is still flopping around a bit like a fish. So the question is whether whole milk is better or skim milk is better. And it may actually depend a little bit on the rest of your diet.
You know, I'd say that next to cholesterol, the biggest flip-flop in the American health food industry is probably fat. For decades, we were told you need to consume a low-fat diet. It's good for your heart. And then along came a number of studies, in particular the PREDIMED study. Terry, do you want to explain what that was about?
Well, PREDIMED is a randomized controlled trial, actually, which we don't have that often in dietary studies. This was a big study of the Mediterranean diet. It was conducted in Spain, and they had a lot of people who were eating a Mediterranean diet, which was not that different from their usual diet, but they got extra olive oil. They had another lot of people also eating a Mediterranean diet, but they got extra nuts. And then they had a lot of people who were told, you're supposed to change your diet and really reduce the amount of fat in your diet, which they tried to do with more or less success. So the comparison of the very high fat arms of this Mediterranean diet trial compared to the somewhat low fat arm are that the people getting olive oil and the people getting extra nuts did much better in terms of heart disease markers, diabetes, and
mortality.
Yeah.
So while the final word is not yet in, it would appear that for many people, a higher fat diet is probably a healthier diet, depending, of course, on the kind of fat. One last question.
Hi, I'm Phil from Chapel Hill. I remember when I was growing up that fruit juices were always recommended, 100% fruit juices, and that's completely flip-flopped. I saw a mother looking to see if it was 100% fruit juice in the grocery store. I wanted to stage an intervention right there, but I decided she had enough on her plate. So that's one of the biggest flip-flops I've seen.
Well, you're absolutely right about that flip-flop. It used to be that we thought of orange juice as an essential element of a good breakfast, along next to that bowl of cereal Joe was talking about and the skim milk that we would put on it, right? We no longer use orange juice as part of our breakfast because it is very high in sugar. And I think that there is now, as part of that flip-flop that you've just alluded to, a recognition that fruit juice, high in sugar fruit juice, is a source of sugar, and it needs to be treated like a source of sugar. It might be a little bit better than soft drinks, but not a whole lot.
If you're going to have fruit, eat the fruit. That's what we were told from Dr. Robert Lustig, who has been at the forefront of this campaign with regard to cut back on sugar. And he has pointed out that the high fructose corn syrup that is often added to some of the fruit juice is probably the worst way to start the day. Well, it's time to kind of begin our wrap up, and we want to share with you Grandma's wisdom.
Because the things that your grandmother or your great-grandmother told you to stay healthy have not been subjected to flip-flops. Surprisingly enough, this simple wisdom really hasn't changed that much in the last 80 or 100 years, right?
Absolutely. So grandmas have been telling you to eat your vegetables.
And now scientists have confirmed that a diet that is rich in vegetables is good for you.
Now, grandmas and parents have been telling their children for a very long time, when they came home from school, go out and play. Exercise is one of the most important things you can do for good health.
Well, and of course, back in the day when kids went outside to play, they were also getting some sunshine and some vitamin D.
We now know that vitamin D is absolutely crucial to good health. And the way kids got their vitamin D 30, 40, 50 years ago was going outside and playing.
We think maybe some kids would benefit from that today. You don't want your child to get sunburned, but a little bit of sun exposure is probably not a bad idea for a growing child.
Now, grandmas have also been telling us to get a good night's sleep.
Well, going out to play can help with that too.
Absolutely. And you know, they weren't talking about 6 or 7 hours. They were talking about 8 or 9 hours. And we now know, because the science supports this wisdom, that sleep is essential for good health, especially cognitive function.
Of course, in Grandma's day, there weren't television sets in the bedroom. There weren't little devices that you could look at even after you'd gone to bed. And scientists now say looking at those screens before you go to sleep, it's not good for your sleep.
Now, grandmas also had one other really important piece of advice, and they would often say, visit your grandma. And that was really key to social interaction. Stay connected. And that's what public radio does every day. It keeps us connected with each other and with the world, because social isolation is really terrible for our health. So visit your grandma, your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones, and stay tuned.
Now, that is all the time we have. We want to thank you so much for listening to the People's Pharmacy Show. This is show number 1000. We want to thank Frank Statio, B.J. Leiderman, Lynn Siegel, Sophie Copeland, Al Wadarsky, and Dave Graydon. And above all, we would like to thank you, the listeners and supporters of WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC. In Chapel Hill, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you very much, and please do tune in next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to The People's Pharmacy.